Good morning, everyone. I'm Xuan, GovInsider's Deputy Editor. Thank you for joining me. I have a really special guest with me today. We have Chong Ling, who is the Chief Sustainability Officer and Director of Policy and Planning Department at PUB Singapore. PUB oversees pretty much all things water in Singapore. As the National Water Agency, it manages Singapore's water supply and use. And starting last year, it also became the National Coastal Protection Agency. So it protects the tiny islands' coastlines from rising sea levels. Mien Ling, thank you so much for joining me today.
Okay. Thanks for having me.
Just to set up our scene or conversation for today and to understand what exactly we are facing up against, can you share a bit about what are some of the main challenges ahead of Singapore in terms of water management and sustainability?
Yeah, sure. So I think when we talk about the long-term sustainability of our water supply in Singapore, I think the challenge is really twofold. The first is climate change. And the second is really we are looking at the increasing water demand into the future. So first, for climate change, basically the impact is very real and it has direct impact on two of our national water taps, the local water catchment as well as our imported water from Malaysia. And simply because both the local catchment as well as the imported water from Malaysia depends on capturing the rainfall that falls within the catchment. So with climate change, where the weather patterns can be erratic, we can potentially expect, longer spells of drought or dry weather. And that will really impact the amount of water we can get from these two national taps.
Yeah.
Secondly, when it comes to increasing water demand, we do project that, in 2060, our water demand is expected to double of what we use today. And what it really means is that then I will have, double the amount of water to treat, double the amount of water to produce. But of course, that will mean that I will need, more resources for me to perform this task. And in terms of energy, because in the future, we do expect ourselves to actually depend more on seawater desalination and water reuse. While they are weather resilient, they do use more energy. So in terms of energy, when we project into 2060, we do expect our energy demand to actually be 4 times of what we need today. So these are really some of the challenges that we are grappling with today, and we are taking active steps in terms of R&D to look for solutions to ensure that we actually have energy efficient technologies in the future to deploy. And of course, we want to manage the water demand so that I don't have so much water to treat and manage. Yeah.
Absolutely. I'm quite curious about the R&D portion of it, but I'm going to come to the tech in just a little bit. But for now, can you share a bit about, obviously you've laid out the challenges. These two things are going to be what PUB is really going to be contending with in the very near future. But with these in mind, what would you say are PUB's priorities then in terms of climate mitigation and adaptation over the next year?
So I think in terms of climate mitigation, I think, one of our key concerns is really looking at, how do we actually reduce the potential energy that are required into the future. So looking at really carbon footprint in the future. So we have a few pronged approach. The first is really, trying to reduce the amount of energy that I require for my processes. So in terms of R&D, I'm looking at energy efficient technologies to do desalination and water reuse. And after I reduce the energy that I require, then the question is, can I actually replace the brown fossil that I demand with renewables? So one priority we have is also to, really look at more opportunities for us to deploy more renewables into the future. In terms of climate change adaptation, like you mentioned, we are now the Coastal Protection Agency. So definitely one of the areas that we are looking at is how do we protect Singapore from the potential sea level rise.
Yeah.
And so on that front, we have already kickstarted, the site-specific engineering studies for the city East Coast area. And progressively, the other coastline, the other segments of the coastline will come on board, and we will progressively study what are the feasible solutions for the different parts of the coastline for Singapore.
Amazing. And I think you've touched on this very briefly, but when it comes to water management, how has PUB's processes and efficiencies in that area evolved to be more sustainable?
So I think first of all, let me start off by saying that this sustainability is really not new to PUB, and it's really very core to our business actually. If you think about back in the early days where we are actually not endowed with like natural resources.
Mm-hmm.
So from the very early days when we started cleaning out Singapore River in the 1980s, and we continue to put in a lot of effort to maintain the cleanliness of our water catchment and reservoirs. That's really to safeguard, the water quality in our reservoir, which is a water source. And in the more recent years, in the early 2000s, we have also started looking at water reuse, and that is also, kind of long before, this resource circularity has become a trendy term as we see today. So really, we have been looking at this for quite a while. But of course, moving forward, some of what will preoccupy us, other than making sure that Singapore doesn't go thirsty, is really how do I do it with the lowest carbon footprint possible. So it really goes back to my earlier 2 points where I would want to reduce as much energy demand as I can, and for what I still need, then I would need to look for renewable replacement for my brown fossil fuels. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think now let's delve a bit deeper into some of the tech innovations that have helped PUB do this. So we talked a bit about desalination. Obviously, energy sources are going to be a big part of that conversation. So can you share a bit about what PUB has done in terms of tech innovations in that front?
Sure, I'll be glad to. So I think when I talk about trying to get more energy efficient technologies, I think one of the key areas we look at is seawater desalination, simply because it uses the most energy. And over the years, we have looked at a few technologies, but one of the promising and interesting one is what we call the biomimetic membranes. And so what it does is actually just incorporating a protein within the membranes. And this protein is what we call aquaporin, which is actually present also in our kidneys. And what it does is really facilitate the transfer of water. So because it facilitates the transfer of the water, I need to expend less pressure and energy to push the water through. So, by having these biomimetic membranes, we can potentially look at reducing this the energy required for seawater desalination. Today, we require about 3.5 kilowatt hour per cubic meters. With this, we are looking at anywhere between like 2 kilowatt hour per cubic meters. And with other technologies, put together as a system, our longer term plan is really to see whether we can achieve less than 1 kilowatt hour per cubic meter. For every cubic meter of desalinated water that we produce. So that is one area.
Right.
In terms of renewable energy, actually since 2005, we have been deploying solar PV on the rooftop of our infrastructure.
Right.
But I think there's only so much rooftop we have. There's only so much land we have. So I think the game changer really came when we went into floating solar PV. And we have just launched one of the first large-scale inland water floating solar PV in the reservoir, right? Just a couple of months ago.
Yeah.
And really, when we look at this floating solar PV, it actually performs better than land-based system because of the cooler environment, because there's no blockage, from nearby structures. But really, it offers us the potential to look at, more area within Singapore where we can actually deploy solar PV to potentially meet the national target of this 2 gigawatt peak by 2030.
100%. I think that's really interesting how we're going back to water when we talk about PV, solar plants, to make sure that it can power the water processes more as well.
Yeah, so we are really excited because now our water surface is really multifunctional. It is a water resource. At the same time, it supports recreational activities. It's a nice amenity, to enjoy the nature. And now it's able to produce clean energy.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think with all these in mind, PUB has already done, these had these initiatives under your belt, to make sustainability more a more achievable target. So when we talk about upcoming tech initiatives, what are some things that PUB has lined up to secure Singapore's water sources and to fight climate change?
Okay, so I think one of the upcoming one that I think we are really excited about is the smart water meters. So it really addresses the demand side of the house. So today, actually, we use mechanical meters prevalently, right? And then, and what it means is that this meter is being read every 2 months. So, by the time you think that there's an anomaly in your water bill, you're 2 months late, and then there could be a leak somewhere that you have already wasted the water. So we are going to deploy some 300,000 smart water meters in Singapore. And that really gives us real-time information about your water demand. And we hope that, with this information on tap, is that you'll be then empowered to know that, what is the health of your water system. And if there's any leak, you can actually take very prompt action. So in that sense, it will help us, manage the water demand. And we have to remember that every drop that is not demanded is a drop not having to be produced.
Yeah.
So really, and of course, so beyond that, an upcoming project that is also exciting is what we call the Tuas Nexus. So that co-locates our wastewater treatment plant together with a waste management facility that is actually run by NEA. And because this is the first time these two infrastructure is being co-located together, we are able to reap quite a number of synergies. And it overall, it actually reduces our carbon footprint and also reduces, for example, the water demand as a nexus. So these are really some of the exciting innovations that are really coming up.
And I like how you mentioned, there's collaboration between public agencies, how you're working with the National Environment Agency. What about with private organizations then? How is PUB working with them to maybe build a more resilient and sustainable water supply?
Yeah, so definitely, when we talk about research, right, PUB doesn't do, of course, we don't do it ourselves, and we collaborate a lot with our Institute of Higher Learnings, as well as our private companies to actually co-create solutions. And eventually, they are the private companies will be the one that commercialize the technologies, and then PUB will be an end user of the technology, and then we reap the benefits from there. So, and the other part of it is, again, the managing of the water demand. So we work very closely with, for example, the large water users to critically look at their processes and, identify gaps and opportunities where they can actually reduce the water demand. So in that sense, they also gain by having savings. And for us, again, we manage to manage this water demand from the non-domestic sector. But of course, beyond the private sector, I think what's important is the community. And so, in terms of our outreach program, we do have many that are targeted at the different levels. So, for example, in terms of your preschool students, of your children, right, we have recently the Ping Fong, very exciting music video that we hope to excite them. And then at the higher tertiary level, we would have, projects that we engage them so that they are aware of greater awareness, and they can also be a steward of, water conservation.
Absolutely. And as we head into the final minute of our session, I would like to end off on a little bit of a more personal note. So I understand from your background, you come from an area of R&D. You've also spent a number of years in the World Health Organization. So obviously now you're sitting in this space within PUB where you have so much to do with helping the nation prepare for the water and climate change, everything that's going to come. What keeps you going in the everyday?
Actually, what keeps me going is I really love water and I really love the environment, and it satisfies me every day thinking that I'm doing a part to produce water, which is essential services to the nation, and playing a part to plan for the future so that we know that the generations to come will still enjoy the same convenience and water safety and security that we have today. So that really keeps me going. Yes.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Mien. We have come to the end of our very short session today, but thank you for speaking with me, and a huge thank you to our audience for tuning in for this session as well. We hope that you have learned something new and that you're ready to dive back into your work with fresh perspectives on sustainability. Coming up after lunch, we have a panel on digital education and upskilling. We'll be discussing how we can equip our people with the skills that they need in this new digital age. And we'll be hearing from a star-studded panel of experts, including Pei Chin Tay, who is the policy lead of the Digital Government Unit at Tony Blair Institute for Global Change. And we also have Yasa Stalagala, who is the Strategic Engagement and Exploration Lead at Sri Lanka's Citra Social Innovation Lab. So stay tuned for that. I hope all of you have a lovely lunch break, and I'll see you back here for this afternoon session. Goodbye.